We are in Washington. We are in the embassy of the Republic of Poland, in the capital of the United States. The President of Republic of Poland, Andrzej Duda, is with us. Hello, Mr. President.
Hello. Hello to our viewers.
Mr. President, after the meeting in the White House, a meeting that was held in a formula that has not been seen in the history of Poland thus far, the media around the world show one specific context, the threat from the Russian Federation. Is the threat to us in the near future, in the foreseeable perspective, an attack by the Russian Federation, a war with Russia?
Maybe I will start from the beginning. I mean, not that there has never been such a situation. There was, and it was commemorated today. And through this double presence of Poland here, through my presence and through the presence of the Prime Minister, we were reminded of the situation that took place in 1999 when Poland entered NATO, and present there were the President of the Republic of Poland, Aleksander Kwaśniewski, and the Prime Minister of the Republic of Poland, Jerzy Buzek. And they were also together then. And as we understood and understand, that is why we were both invited to this 25th anniversary by President Joe Biden. And indeed, we had a meeting where we talked about the situation in NATO, about the security of NATO countries, including our country, the Republic of Poland. Of course, the situation related to the Russian aggression against Ukraine, but it was not just the White House, although the White House was the most important point today, but I also had meetings in Congress, invited by both the Senate and the House of Representatives. Also very important and also significant from the point of view of our security today, in the situation we are in.
Mr. President, however, the context related to the direct threat from the Russian Federation, the war that is at our borders, is a context that has, of course, a recall in our history, but here and now it is a thing that is even in the center of political disputes, even in the country in which we are now, thousands of kilometers away. Once again, I would like to ask you if the perspective of the threat from the Russian Federation, our preparations to face it, was touched on during today's talks?
Mainly, yes, exactly. We talked today about NATO, we talked today about these 25 years on one hand, but above all, we talked about the situation we have here and now, and in connection with how we should look into the future and what we should do in the future. Hence, among other things, I spoke in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, and in the White House about my proposal to raise the threshold of defense expenses in NATO countries to 3% because, as I argue, the situation has changed significantly in the last 10 years. In 2014, in Newport, in Wales, NATO countries, after the Russian aggression against Ukraine, the first one, where Russia officially began the occupation of Crimea, but it was not officially that it attacked Donetsk and Lugansk, it was officially said that it was the separatists. That's what Russia claimed. Today we have a completely different situation. Back then, 2% was said to be needed to strengthen NATO countries, to rebuild the military potential of NATO countries. Today, for the last 2 years, we are dealing with full-scale Russian aggression against Ukraine, with a war that Europe has not seen since World War II, with the reborn and fully visible Russian imperialism, which requires hard action from NATO countries. First of all, it should be stopped in Ukraine and scolded in Ukraine. And that's what I said today, both in the Congress and in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, that is, in the United States Congress. But I also said it in the White House. But in addition, each of the NATO countries should rebuild their military potential. I put it very simply. If this military potential is rebuilt, where today we spend over 4% on defense and rebuild this potential very effectively, Russia will not dare to attack strong NATO countries militarily and technologically, because it has already found out in Ukraine what it means to go against NATO military technology.
Mr. President, in response to your voice, which was heard and quoted in American media even before you appeared here, There were signals that, first of all, it's necessary to ensure that this 2% was implemented by all the countries in the North Atlantic Pact. And we even heard such voices also from Poland, from important places in Poland, that it is something that will not be met with great enthusiasm from the host. How do you respond to this kind of voices?
Well, I will say even more. I think it does not meet with great enthusiasm on the European Forum, above all because today quite a few countries do not spend 2% on defense. I really hope that this proposal will increase pressure on these countries, that this level of spend on defense will increase as quickly as possible, so that there will be no more talks as we have had recently, where we say we need to help Ukraine today, we need to send ammunition to Ukraine, and the leaders shake hands and say, yes, but we don't have ammunition. Yes, but we don't have production. Yes, but we are not able to fulfill some of our commitments, which we have made at NATO summits. Because today we have no resources. We have no soldiers, we have no planes, we have no this, we have no that. We are not able to store weapons in your country because we do not have weaponry that we could hand over. So I say, okay, then raise the level of spending on defense. It is within this raise that we need to build, perhaps by agreeing together in the European Union, factories where we will produce ammunition. Let's collect this ammunition. A few thousand missiles are fired daily in Ukraine in order to defend against Russian aggression. I am very sorry, but how much ammunition do European countries which are in NATO have? Enough to defend themselves for one day?
But, Mr. President, it was the European Union which announced that 1 million pieces of ammunition will be delivered, and in fact, a few months before this date, a representative of the European Union has already announced that we will not be able to fulfill this promise, and much earlier, Jens Stoltenberg warned in the first months of this war that the rate of using ammunition by Ukraine in this war is so high that he, the Secretary General of NATO, is worried. And at the same time, we hear about ideas to create a European defense doctrine, defense policy, a European army. What do you think about this idea?
You have exactly confirmed the validity of my proposal of 3%. So in fact, despite the fact that there will probably be skeptical voices, this proposal is reasonably justified. That is why you can calmly follow this proposal, lobby for it. Of course, it requires lobbying, maybe long lobbying, but because it is sensible and is in fact the only solution that can be adopted today to rebuild European military potential and security potential, therefore, it certainly cannot be abandoned only because there are some skeptical voices. And these skeptical voices will certainly exist. And as for this, you can be sure that they will continue to be there. Because I already heard these skeptical voices when for the first time I went out 2 days after the Russian aggression on Ukraine, exactly on February 26, 2022, with a proposal to recognize Ukraine as a candidate for the European Union. Then I wrote a letter to the European Commission, which was signed by the presidents of our part of Europe. I am talking about the European Union, but in the West it was met with skepticism. They said to me, leave it. Our parliaments will not accept it. There is no chance to accept Ukraine into the European Union. It makes no sense. A few months later, everyone said yes, Ukraine needs to be given the status of a candidate, and in June 2022, Ukraine received this status. Therefore, I calmly say today, 3%. And please, I am opening a discussion on this topic. I'm not saying that such a decision must be made in a month, in 2, in 3, or even at the nearest NATO summit, but we need to talk about it because today it is needed in Europe in order to raise the level of defense spending because it is necessary today to stop Russian imperialism.
Mr. President, when you read American media after this proposal, there are also comments that this is a kind of a ball released not only to partners in the North Atlantic Pact, but also a ball given in a way to the internal American political yard, because the issue of financing the armed forces is one of the fundamental disputes that are taking place here, and this is one of the main voices that Donald Trump has raised for years, also during his presidency.
Well, what I propose today, and I said it to the congressman, both the senators I met, and it was the Speaker of the Senate, that is the chairman and the representative of the minority, that is the head of the Senate party, which is in the minority, and the same in the House of Representatives, also the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the leader of the minority. Gentlemen, it's simple. 3%, among other things, so that you can tell your voters are American taxpayers. Listen, it's not that America is carrying and you are carrying all the burdens related to defending Europe. No, Europe is also responsible for its own security. NATO is responsible for its own security. NATO countries are raising their level of expenses on defense in order to be able to defend themselves effectively. We, of course, have the largest army in the world, but we only support it as the largest army in the world. However, they are approaching this reasonably, so it is worth helping them, because they are reasonable. I say, you want to have such an opportunity? However, if you ask me about Ukraine, I will say this. By helping Ukraine today, you are investing. Because today it's about you spending money, just money. You don't have to send soldiers. If it comes to it that Russia will win in Ukraine and the Russian imperialism will not be stopped, maybe Russia will want to go further in its imperialist pursuits. It is highly likely. And then America will have to send its soldiers again, just as they died in World War I and World War II, and hundreds of thousands of American soldiers' graves, sons and fathers of American families, will today mark a field in Western Europe? Yes, there is a potential threat that it will happen again. If you do not carry out wise policy. Today, wise policy is to spend money on equipment for Ukraine, for the Ukrainian army, which they will be able to defend against Russian aggression with, against the great advantage that Russia has for natural reasons, and it really doesn't cost you much at the moment.
Have you, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, heard any new information, any new context about this threat, which you mentioned here in Washington?
First of all, we heard what was most important for us, that there is an agreement to sell Apache helicopters to Poland, that there is American support in the form of $2 billion in this purchase. This is the most important information for us, that we have an agreement to purchase other very important elements strengthening the military security of Poland. We are talking about Yazmak, for example. This is absolutely key information for our security when it comes to modern means of defense. And this is the most important thing today, because we came here to act on the security of the Republic of Poland. This is absolutely fundamental for us. However, of course, an element of this security is that Russian aggression should be stopped in Ukraine, that this aggression should not go any further.
Mr. President, you mentioned the perspectives related to Europe. It is impossible not to ask about something which was said here in the United States. A few weeks ago, the Polish head of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Radosław Sikorski, was asked by PBS about the European dimension of defense policy, and when the journalist asked him whether such a European ability to defend itself should be created outside from NATO, Radosław Sikorski replied that it should be created in full strategic harmony with the United States. He did not say that it was supposed to be a part of NATO. In fact, although in harmony with the United States, he confirmed that it was about creating a completely new structure next to, outside the North Atlantic Treaty. Do you share such a point of view on the European dimension of defense?
I believe that a European agreement on strengthening defense may be created, but it should be an element of NATO as a whole, in the framework of NATO. Just as we have created cooperation in the framework of the Mediterranean on matters related to energy policy and communication in order to develop the infrastructure within the framework of the Mediterranean, where there are only European Union countries, in order to create a synergy effect on one hand, but on the other hand, a kind of accelerator that will speed up the development of this part of the European Union, which, infrastructurally, in the context of Western Europe, is withdrawn because we were behind the Iron Curtain. Today, we cooperate with each other in order to speed up this development, in order to improve the efficiency of spending European funds on infrastructure, above all, these funds from the policy of cohesion. This is what cooperation in the framework of the Mediterranean is for, in order to build our infrastructure potential even faster. but within the framework of the European Union.
Ale w ramach Unii Europejskiej.
So you think the same way about the European army?
And I think the same way about the European army. Please, let's create a European agreement on joint military production, on joint actions in the military field, but let it all be implemented within the framework of NATO, to which we all belong.
W ramach NATO, do którego wszyscy należymy.
Mr. President, you also mentioned, and this is something that is a subject of a very loud discussions in Poland today and is directly related to the effects of Russian aggression on Ukraine. Today, Ukraine is a candidate state for the European Union, and at the same time, we heard such assurances again from the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs in Munich during the security conference that in fact Ukraine has been accepted into the European Union, into the European United Market, and its agricultural products have been accepted in this way on the European market. And the Polish transport and agricultural industry is paying for it. The Minister of Foreign Affairs said that it cannot go on like this, but he admitted that it is so currently. How did this happen? After all, in the first weeks, we heard about the need to provide grain transit through the territory of the Republic of Poland outside the European Union to Asia, to Africa. Is it true that Poland and Polish farmers were deceived by the European Union?
Prawda jest taka, że decyzje były podjęte.
The truth is that the decisions were made at the European Union level, and that is why I say today that this is not a matter on which Poland can actually decide completely freely, because if we block our market, there will immediately be claims against us through the European Union, because we would go against the decisions that have been made at the European level.
Rozstrzygnięcia, które zostały zrealizowane podjęte na poziomie europejskim, więc dzisiaj.
So today, in fact, Europe should intervene to protect our market from the flood of Ukrainian agricultural products.
Ukraińskich produktów rolnych. Dlaczego?
Why don't Western farmers protest against this?
Zachodni rolnicy.
Well, precisely because it is a very simple life phenomenon. Ukrainians want to sell their agricultural products as soon as possible. The European Union market has been open for them. Such a decision was made in Brussels.
But the farmers' protests are precisely against this.
We are the first country abroad Ukraine. What are Ukrainians doing? They are trying to sell as soon as possible in the first possible place. Unfortunately, Poland is the first possible place today. In addition, we have a highway, which is the easiest to enter in Western Europe. We have railways, which are the easiest to enter the European Union area from Ukraine. These are the facts. And this is a problem that has fallen on us today, but in fact, it is caused by the decisions made in Brussels. And Brussels should intervene on this matter. I said this to Prime Minister Donald Tusk. I said, Mr. Prime Minister, you have your relations at the level of the EPP, which today rules in the European Commission and actually rules the European Union. You have the majority. You are the ruling coalition today. You have been the leader of the EPP recently. You have relations with the politicians who make these decisions. Please intervene and defend our interests, our market, because today this is a fundamental matter. The problem affects our farmers first and foremost, and it is indeed very dangerous for them and their existence. And I am not surprised that farmers are protesting.
But these farmers are indicated as people who pay a price for the fact that Ukraine will receive help in this way. This is what Polish farmers pay for. This is what the Polish transport industry pays for. And at the same time, the same people are accused, they are pointed out as almost co-partners of this attack on Ukraine. How do you look at it? Because there are a lot of similar voices on the matter.
Unfortunately, these are actions used as propaganda. These are political actions. And of course, the Russian reaction also contributes to all of this because it is difficult to avoid it. These are also the effects of Russian propaganda. Russia is also doing its job here to complicate Polish-Ukrainian relations. relations between Ukraine and other countries. Today, agitation between Poland and Ukraine is in the interest of Russia. No one will win more than Russia.
Mr. President, how do you look at what happened in Poland, at the way in which farmers were treated, among other things, during the demonstrations that took place recently in center of Warsaw?
I look at it with great indignation because I think it is despicable to treat hardworking people in this way. Desperate people, like farmers.
Ciężko pracujących ludzi, zrozpaczonych ludzi, jakimi są rolnicy.
And I remind you that there have been many protests over the last 9 years. Today, the current coalition, the ruling one, which once organized these protests when they were the opposition, there were protests under the Polish parliament, there were protests in other places, and the ministers responsible for the police and for the actions of the police approached this with great restraint, especially Minister Mariusz Kamiński, and the police almost never used violence to such an extent as we recently witnessed in Warsaw. The photos we saw were absolutely shocking. I am curious what today's ruling coalition would say if such brutal methods, as were used against farmers, were used against demonstrators whom they called, whom they organized to protest in front of the parliament or in other places, or the demonstrations that took place in Warsaw.
Przed Sejmem, czy w innych miejscach, czy manifestacji, które miały miejsce w Warszawie.
Is that why they order the police to do such things? Because they think that the farmers are not their voters, and that, therefore, it costs them nothing vote-wise, that farmers will be beaten up because farmers will not vote for them anyway? Maybe yes.
Mr. President, many people ask themselves questions today about whether the law still applies in Poland. We have a prosecutor, a country prosecutor, that was appointed with the violation of all the rules. We have a situation in which the ministers of the government informed that they will break the law from the tribune of the parliament. Then they proceed to break the law. They force this kind of decisions with brutal force. What is the solution to this? You are the guardian of the Constitution, and it is happening in public view. It is happening in front of everyone. What should people who see this think? And they are used to the fact that they are the citizens of a country with the rule of law.
For years we have heard that law does not apply in Poland,
Przestrzega się zasad praworządności, że w Polsce
that the law is violated in Poland, and so on. Even though the law was passed in accordance with all the rules in the Polish parliament, all the legislative procedures were properly implemented, there was a roar of the current camp ruling, the opposition, that the law was broken.
złamana praworządność, to samo powtarzają.
The same thing was repeated by their colleagues from the EPP and other European parties who were in the coalition then ruling in Europe about the situation in Poland. They blocked the money from the EU's recovery plan, shouting that the rule of law should be restored in Poland. And what turned out to be the case recently, that the restoration of this rule of law was based only on the change of power in Poland. Nothing had to be done. No legal changes were needed. Everything was fine. Since it turned out that the EU's recovery plan could be unblocked only because the power in Poland has changed. This shows the hypocrisy of today's elites ruling in Brussels. It shows political insolence that Poland has been treated with for all these years. And it shows that the concept of democracy has been completely ignored by them. And what we have been watching for the last few years was a display of hypocrisy and political cynicism. Democracy is when they win the elections. If they lose the elections, there is no democracy. If they don't rule, there is no democracy. If they rule, there is democracy. This is exactly the definition of democracy that we have had, as you can see, served for the last few years.
Mr. President, what is the solution to all of this?
I calmly carry out my tasks as the President of the Republic of Poland. As I announced, I write letters, I carry out the actions that are planned for me by the Constitution. I direct matters to the Constitutional Tribunal where they can be resolved by those in power in accordance with the Constitution. I act calmly and consistently here. I do not have command over the police. Contrary to what some people say and shout, I also do not have command over the military. Because even though that it is written in the Constitution that the President of the Republic of Poland is an accomplice of the armed forces, please look at the next records of the Constitution and the law. This is done by the Minister of National Defense. When I hear that the President should resign from the service and protection of the state, be protected by the military gendarmerie, I smile and say, ladies and gentlemen, the President in Poland does not even have the competence to appoint the commander of the main military gendarmerie. And supposedly that he is to have an influence on the military gendarmerie as such? Therefore, I calmly carry out tasks within the scope of the Constitution and the law. I act consistently, and I will act consistently throughout the entire period of this term. I have almost 9 years of presidential experience. I will manage. As I manage at the moment, calmly and consistently, acting, everything is noted in writing. We direct the appropriate letters to the appropriate bodies, to the Prosecutor General, the Minister of Justice, to the Prime Minister, to the Constitutional Court. Everything is documented. At the right time, appropriate actions will be taken in accordance with all the requirements set by the law.
Mr. President, that's my final question. Should the issue of Russian influence in Poland, which has been examined and described in the report of the Special Commission, not have been a case that was opened at the beginning of your presidency, of your term, of the government of PiS party in Poland, and not at the very end?
It should have been.
And why wasn't it?
Please ask this question to those who present bills and pass laws. This proposal was given to the previous ruling party. It was suggested a long time ago. It was not done. It was done at the last moment. I regret it. Such a commission should have been created 3 years ago. Such a commission should have been created latest right after the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And it was really needed. And that's why I decided to sign this bill. Only because it was really needed. Because these Russian influences exist. They are a fact. They are really not small in Poland. And everyone who has a little common sense and orientation in our history knows perfectly well that we were a country where Russian services worked as they wanted for 40 years. There are no consequences of that today? Really? There are no Russian influence agencies in Poland?
There are?
There aren't? Do you believe it? There's a lot of them. And we see them often, on many levels. And these are the things that really should be looked at. How much Russian influence exists today, especially in the most important places of the Republic of Poland, because it has fundamental meaning for our security. And I regret that this case was actually messed up. It was just politically screwed up. I regret it a lot.
Ona została po prostu politycznie zepsuta. Żałuję ogromnie.
President of the Republic of Poland, Andrzej Duda. Mr. President, thank you very much for this meeting on Telewizja Republika. We're coming back to studio.